Hi, listeners. Welcome to Grief Out Loud. Remember the last time you tried to talk about grief and suddenly everybody left the room? Grief Out Loud is opening up this often avoided conversation because grief is hard enough without having to go through it alone. We bring you a mix of personal stories, tips for supporting children, teens, and yourself, and interviews with professionals in the grief world. Platitude and cliche-free, we promise. Grief Out Loud is hosted by me, Jana DeCristofaro, and produced by Dougie Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Lingering, shivering, simmering, and splintering. These are the words DJ Arsene Versailles used to illustrate what it felt like when his mother, Florcie Yves Versailles, died of COVID-19 in May of 2020. These words are remarkable in that they aren't commonly used to describe grief, and yet they are supremely apt. I'm recording this introduction on Thursday, April 7th, 2022, a day when the death toll from COVID-19 in the U.S. just surpassed 975,000. Globally, there have been over 6 million deaths. It's easy sometimes for these numbers, especially as they grow larger, to lose meaning. But they don't lose meaning for the family, friends, and community members left behind. What does it mean to have a parent, a sibling, a partner, or anyone else in your circle die of a disease that has been in the news every day for over 2 years? And what does it mean when that disease starts to not be in the news? For DJ, the shivering, simmering, and splintering grief he experienced when his mom died was and continues to be layered, as most grief is. And some of these layers are specific to his mom being a Black woman who died during a pandemic of a disease that has come to be so much more than just a medical diagnosis. DJ's mom was committed to social justice, and she worked hard to help the people in her community of the Back Bay of Boston to have housing and food security. This activism inspired DJ to do similar work in the wake of her death. He met Kristin Urquiza, the founder of Marked by COVID, a grassroots organization dedicated to promoting accountability, amplifying the voices of those most impacted by COVID, and supporting survivors and those who are grieving. They are also working to get a National COVID Memorial Day legislated at the state and national level. Through this work, DJ found not only an outlet for his drive to ensure that we as a country honor those who have died of COVID, but also a community to support him in his grief. DJ, thank you for making time today to have this conversation with me for Grief Out Loud.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and your time.
I found my way to you in sort of a investigative way, right? And I was looking into organizations and people that are working to bring attention and awareness to the grief of those who have had someone die of COVID-19. And I came across your name and an interview that you had done on radio station back east talking about your mom, Florcie, who died of COVID-19 back in May of 2020. And since I found you that way, I also have read a little bit more of, you've written quite a bit about your mom and your experience. And the thing that really stood out to me is you talked a lot about how much she loves and loved her hometown, the Back Bay of Boston, and that she did so much work in the realm of social justice. And I'm wondering, what other ways are you hoping that your mom will be remembered?
Well, I want my mom to be remembered just for, the love and respect that she had for other people. I mean, when you approach my mom, she just lights up the room. Her smile just radiates. And she was such a beloved mother, sister, aunt. And she was loved by many, many people who wanted to help others reach their full potential, and as she's done with me as well, and really had a positive and dramatic impact in this community of the Back Bay of Boston, Massachusetts, but anywhere that she has lived. She's lived in Florida, New York City, Montreal, Haiti. She could talk to you about anything for hours, and the conversation will just be amazing.
So it seems like your mom, no matter where she lived, was able to create community around her. And then, she died in May of 2020. The pandemic hit the US on the East Coast, particularly like February, March. And so there were quite a few months where you weren't able to visit her. She was in a facility. And I wondered, we heard a lot of stories on the news of how people stayed in touch, but how did you stay connected to your mom during that time of those restrictions?
So unfortunately, I wasn't able to stay in touch with my mother during the time frame from the last time I saw my mom, January 1st, 2020, New Year's Day, up until when she passed. And there were a lot of complications and circumstances because of that, not just with the COVID restrictions and transportation restrictions, but it was difficult on my mom's end because she didn't have a phone in the nursing home that she was at, so it would have been difficult to talk to her that way, and family member would have had to been present to get my mom to talk to me. That was definitely difficult that I didn't have that communication with her.
So how did you get the news then that she was diagnosed with COVID-19 and then had died?
I was in communication with my uncle at times throughout the last few months preceding her passing, and a week before my mom had passed away, I learned that she had stopped eating and drinking and just had shut down. And I knew that was a horrible, horrible sign. The next morning, she passed away in the middle of the night. It was 1:16 in the morning. My uncle had told me that he had received a phone call, and then he called me 9:30 in the morning Saturday, and that was just devastating. There were a lot of ranges of emotion. I felt paralyzed. A lot of thoughts and emotions just running through me because she meant the world to me.
So a lot of just a cascade of emotions, of shock. And I know you wrote about grief being bewildering, shivering, simmering, and splintering. And those are words I don't usually hear associated with grief. They make so much sense when I read them, but I wonder how you relate to them in this moment.
Yeah, I relate to them in this moment. The shimmering feeling is, well, in my case, like, you just start to have like the what ifs and, just a level of responsibility. I did feel there was a lot that was going on across the different hospitals, nursing homes, rehabilitation centers that she was in and out of, where the level of care could have been better. Thinking about it, wondering what could have been, had she received, what I feel like was just better care, more attention.
I know we're going to talk more about kind of the work that you're doing in the realm of advocacy for bringing more attention to people who have had someone die of COVID-19 and the grief involved in that. And I wonder, in that work with other people that you've talked with who have had someone die of COVID-19, how does that sense of like this could have been prevented? Is that a common thing that comes up for folks?
It is a common thing that comes up, especially learning that COVID-19 and what the pandemic was going to become and how deadly it was, and that there just was not enough done to, save the amount of lives that we have lost in just catastrophe. And with Marked by COVID, that's one of our objectives is bringing accountability and responsibility on behalf of the government. First acknowledging that they were wrong and knowing what the outcome is going to become, and just not doing enough to prevent that. And I know I could speak for all of the Marked by COVID community members that all of our loved ones should still be here today.
Can you talk a little bit about Marked by COVID for listeners who aren't familiar with the organization?
Yes, Marked by COVID is a national grassroots organization founded by Kristin Urquiza and Kristin Keeves. Kristin Urquiza, co-founder and co-executive, had lost her father to COVID. I first listened to Kristin Urquiza at the Democratic National Convention. She had spoken of the story of her father's passing and about marked by COVID. And I remember just feeling connected right away. And I just had a feeling that we were going to be connected somehow down the road. And then I remember filling out my story and writing about my mom and how she passed away on the Marked by COVID website. And then a few months later, I received an email from Kristin Urquiza, and she invited me to the weekly Zoom meetings we have on Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. I joined. This was on March 11th of 2021, and the rest was history. Felt connected, and I had a community of members to grieve with, because I felt like I didn't have that chance to really grieve. It just had happened. It happened so fast, and it was just still sinking in. I hold a lot of emotions inside too. That's the simmering part. So that makes it that makes it worse when you hold it inside, because one day it could just all come out at once. So
for me, in the work that I do at Dougie Center, facilitating peer grief support groups, we hear over and over again how powerful and meaningful and important it is to be able to come into a room, whether it's a Zoom room or a in-person room, and not be the only one who's grieving, to have that connection with people, even if who died and how they died can be very different. The relationship we have with the person can be really different, but just that like core understanding of not feeling so alone in grief. And then we also have groups that are specific for age ranges, specific for who died, specific for how the person died. And I wonder what it's been like for you to be with other people who have all had someone die of COVID-19. And in that, like, what stands out to you as perhaps being unique or remarkable about having had someone die in that way versus other ways that people die?
Yeah, I would say just feeling a part of a family and able to share our thoughts and just having that support system on top of feeling a part of a family and community, and talk about how one another are doing. So just care and concern, and I feel like that helps all of us just get through daily life, which isn't easy, and just feeling a part of what we're trying to accomplish, and getting legislators to sign on to have a COVID Remembrance Day to memorialize and remember all of the lives lost, because every life is precious and should be remembered, every legacy. And unfortunately, there weren't a lot of family members that were able to have the proper funeral and burial services with their loved ones, just because of the circumstance of the pandemic. And
so as you're talking, it seems like there's kind of two forces coming together in this. One, just a collective need to honor and recognize the impact. Globally, we're at 6 million people who have died. We're just past the 1 million mark of people who have died in the US of COVID-19. So wanting that collective honoring of those people's lives and the impact of their deaths. But then also the idea that as individuals and as families, people weren't able to honor and memorialize the lives of their people who died in the way they would have if the pandemic circumstances weren't in place. And so those coming together just speaks to that drive to honor. And, as we talked about at the beginning of like just wanting to remember your mom and make sure other people know the impact that she had on you and on the world as well. And can you talk a little bit more about the specific initiative to get that National Day of Remembrance legislated?
so we have a core group of Marked by COVID members in specifically Massachusetts. We have Miss Jennifer Ritz Sullivan, who's our COVID justice leader for Massachusetts. And I had come across Jennifer in that first marked by COVID meeting last year. She tragically lost her mother to the pandemic. I've worked with her with sending letters to legislators to get them signed on to the bill to have COVID Memorial Day for Massachusetts, but we're also working on it nationally. And I know Senator Warren and Senator Markey introduced the resolution to Senate. So that's been a work in progress to get that bill established. And that there has been frustration just with the length that it's taken in getting that, but we're hoping to get the bill established sooner rather than later.
And for you personally, DJ, what's your sense of how not being able to hold, the memorial service you wanted to for your mom, how has that shaped the grief that you've experienced since she died?
Yeah, it's definitely shaped the grief even more. I mean, my family always wanted a private ceremony, but I would have loved, a few more close friends, family members to have been able to attend, but because of the restrictions with the number of attendees that were allowed, there was a limit to who could attend. So that was difficult.
You've also written quite a bit, DJ, about the idea that, and you kind of alluded to this at the beginning, of the circumstances for your mom in terms of the quality of medical care that she received, and the idea that, current and historical racism in the medical arena played a role in that. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about that.
Yes, I definitely feel that played a huge role, and that goes back even to 2012 when my mom's health really took a turn for the worst. Me and my mom were at Spain. My mom was in the middle of a medical emergency, and I remember the police officers, they weren't taking that seriously. And one of the police officers that I remember them saying was get up and act and walk out like a lady, and threatening to arrest my mom for trespassing because the bank was closed, and she was getting agitated and upset and sad all at once. And then she was in the ICU by night's end, and a few days later suffered 2 cardiac arrests a week before Thanksgiving, and miraculously survived those. And the doctors said that my mom wasn't going to make it. I definitely thank God, and my mom definitely had the will to survive. And
so that experience back in 2012 of watching your mom not get the medical assistance and care she needed when she was having an event at the bank, and then did it seem like that similar lack of care also played a role in her death in 2020?
Yes, definitely, and just not having the just the same level of care, I felt like, just based on her race and ethnicity compared to others as well. So I definitely felt that played a role, not having that access to that care to better her health and prolong her life, perhaps.
What do you wish people most understood about the fact that your mom died of COVID-19 and what that's meant for you?
I want people to remember that my mom should still be here today, and as well as our other community members, family members, and loved ones, that they all should be here, and all the other lives that were lost. If there was, just action taken to, prevent this mass death and tragedy, and making sure the healthcare workers, nurses, doctors are prepared to save a lot of lives, that adds to the grief immensely.
we're talking in March of 2022, so it's an anniversary time in a sense, right? Because the WHO, World Health Organization, declared COVID, an official pandemic in March of 2020. And what's coming up for you around this time of year?
So coming up for me around this time of year, well, I was furloughed because of the pandemic, so I was temporarily laid off at my job. I was a records management specialist for an international law firm. That affected me there financially and emotionally, mentally, and just wondering how I was going to get by in those 7 months that I was out of work from April 1st of 2020 to November 1st of 2020. I did end up going back, which was great. And I also feel that, to understand the scope of these deaths, like we're thinking of the numbers, but not sort of the personal experiences, not in the life long lasting impacts that it will cause. And every day I know, we're seeing more deaths to COVID. It just adds to the grief and frustration. Every life is precious and valuable. We all want to live a long time and make the most of our lives. So it just adds to that devastation when you feel lives were taken away, and that shouldn't have been the case.
I've talked with some other folks who have had someone die of COVID-19 and how the ebb and flow of public health mandates and mask mandates and things like that plays a role in their grief as well, and affects people very differently. And I wonder how that is for you, especially as we move into the spring of 2022, where there's kind of a large scale shift away from, mask mandates and other restrictions that have been in place for the last 2 years, and kind of moving into a different mindset phase of interacting with the pandemic, and just wondering what that brings up for you.
It just feels, some folks want to create return to this, normal, but I can speak for myself and other members. There'll never be a normal for us and our families with what we went through this COVID pandemic. It's been historic and life changing. It's changed our way of life going forward. It is very difficult to see how mandates have been lifted and relaxed, and you just feel like some are just not taking the pandemic seriously. And we're still in the pandemic, and it's difficult seeing the folks that don't have masks and not knowing. It just feels like folks aren't having that in their minds. With this pandemic, it seems like it's going to be something that we're going to be dealing with for a little bit. Like we have flu season.
So it seems like it's on two levels. There's the tangible piece of, seeing people not wear masks or mandates being lifted, and like the worry and concern that can bring up. But then there's also the symbolic piece of maybe watching the country or your community sort of go back to normal, quote unquote, or move forward, and how when you're grieving, it can feel so left behind in that, and unseen and unacknowledged in the fact that the grief creates a circumstance where there is no going back to normal. There's just living into this new, quote unquote, abnormal normal. I imagine that can really exacerbate that sense of disconnection and loneliness and grief when it seems like the rest of the world is moving in a different direction.
Definitely, because people are dying and coming disabled from long COVID, and it just feels like it's going to get swept under the rug and forgotten about and not brought to the forefront. And I know other marked by COVID community members feel just that our losses have been politicized and debated, and our grief has been disenfranchised. And it's just insulting to see politicians and government acknowledging the loss through photo ops, and just feeling like our intelligence is just being insulted and disrespected, just not for us personally, respectively, but also on behalf of our family members. Like, people are seeing it through the numbers, but not as individuals. So that's definitely, very, disappointing and discouraging and frustrating, to name a few words.
What do you think your mom would have to say or think about the advocacy work that you are doing with Marked by COVID?
Yeah, I feel my mom was smiling from heaven and proud of the work that I'm doing, and she was my inspiration with the advocacy work that she did on her end and in this community, and establishing affordable housing and in the building of the 10 city apartment complex that took years to get approved to build, and being a huge part of that work. And her activism continues to live through me and my work with Marked by COVID.
For listeners who would like to get involved with Marked by COVID and the advocacy work that you all are doing to create a national day of remembrance, what's one way someone could get connected with you all?
So one way that someone could get connected with us all is through our COVID Memorial website, www.covidmemorialday.org. And they can take action by sending emails to their legislators, respectively, through the website, and also sharing it with others and spreading the word and encouraging others to take action. That's a great way to be in solidarity with us and be an ally as well. That would be deeply appreciated for those that want to get involved with our work.
Well, I appreciate that. And listeners, I'll put a link to the website in the show notes, as I always do. And DJ, thank you for the work that you're doing, for the writing that you've put out in the world about your mom and about your grief, and for your willingness to come on Grief Out Loud and share about your experience. I really, just grateful for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and giving me this space and to talk about my mom and our story and Marked by COVID and what we're trying to accomplish. And I definitely thank all the listeners for taking time of their day and listening, and hope that they can become involved in helping us with our work.
Well, thank you again, DJ, and listeners out there. I thank you each and every time for being part of the community, for sharing the show with people who you think might be helped or supported in some way by listening to an episode. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. That's DOUGY.org. That's also our website where you can find all of the past episodes of Grief Out Loud, all of our free and downloadable tip sheets and activity sheets, as well as information about our local peer grief support group programming. So thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us again next time. Grief Out Loud is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund.